Hello, friends, and welcome to Jewels of Truth. My name is Daniel Fontenot. Today we will speak about Donald Trump meeting Adventism. Now, if you have followed me previous to this presentation, if you are familiar with our teaching here on Jewels of Truth, I'm going to remind us, and if you don't know this, then this will be a new thought to you, but what I have been saying is that in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, verses 3 and 4, actually 2, 3, and 4, let me just read this verse here, Daniel 11, verse 3 and 4, no, Daniel 11, verses 2 and 3. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and Persia represents the United States of America at the end of the world. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all. So you have 4 kings. So you have 3 kings, which starts in 1989 at the time of the end. And if you don't understand that, yes, 1798 is the time of the end also, but in a deeper way, 1989 represents the time of the end. So starting in 1989, you have 3 kings, or presidents in the United States of America, and that is President Clinton, President Bush, Obama, and then the 4th one is Trump. All right? So it says, And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That mighty king being Alexander at one level, but at another level, this king represents Donald Trump. Both Xerxes, king of Grecia, that 4th king, and that mighty king of Greece, Alexander, also represents President Donald Trump. I'm not going to go into an explanation of that. I've already done that in previous videos. You'll have to go and view those previous videos to understand why I am saying that. But in the meantime, I'm saying that Donald Trump will meet Adventism. You'll understand why I say that here in just a moment. But remember, I'm saying that Alexander the Great represents Donald Trump at the end of the world. All right? So, this is a passage here from Stephen Haskell in his book, The Story of Daniel the Prophet, page 187. And this is what he says. In following the rapid conquest of Alexander, symbolized by the goat which touched not the ground, no mention has yet been made of the Jews. As God brought Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus into direct contact with his people that they might know the God of heaven, so he permitted Alexander to learn of him. And I could read that this way. This is how I am interpreting this, because these things were written more for our time than for the time in which they were written. As God brought Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus into direct contact with his people that they might know the God of heaven, so he permitted Donald Trump to learn of him. While that conqueror was passing from Tyre after its surrender toward Gaza, which guards the entrance into Egypt, he stopped at Jerusalem. So on his way, Donald Trump, after his victories, he's going to stop. Somehow he's confronted with Adventism. Josephus states that great consternation filled the city when it was known that the Greek warrior was coming. We're going to read more about that incident here in a bit. But the high priest Judas had a dream in which he was bidden to go out to meet Alexander, arrayed in his priestly garments and accompanied by the temple officers clad in white. When Alexander met this company, much to the surprise of his army and generals, he bowed to the ground to worship the God whose name was on the mitre worn by the high priest. He then accompanied the priest to the temple at Jerusalem where the sacrifices were explained. Moreover, the prophecies of Daniel concerning the rise and fall of Babylon, the conquest of Medo-Persia, and its subsequent fall, and the rise of a third empire were explained. They were explained to Alexander. Daniel, who had witnessed before Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, was then quoted to Alexander. I believe with all my heart that Donald Trump will be confronted with Adventism. Somehow, some way, this history is going to be repeated. There is no new thing under the sun. These things were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Past history will be repeated. The mighty conqueror was in the presence of the Spirit of God, and was given the message that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. Would he bow in submission and let God conquer for him? This was the opportune moment in his life. You know, over the past few years, Donald Trump has been said to be represented by, I think, Cyrus. Okay? And I would disagree with that. Okay? He has been exalted greatly, to say the least. But Donald Trump is represented by Alexander. And Alexander's end was not good. Alexander acknowledged God, but left Jerusalem and pushed forward in battle. Gaza fell, Egypt was entered, and there, in order to gratify a selfish pride, he had himself proclaimed son of Jupiter Ammon. He who might have become a son of God chose rather to be called the son of Jupiter. The result of Greek education, which Greek education permeates our educational system today, the result of Greek education and learning is fully exemplified in this one act. The act of Alexander calling himself the son, or proclaiming himself the son of Jupiter Ammon. The outcome of such a choice, a fit consummation of all Greek teaching, was met at Babylon when the king, at his very prime, laid down and died with no hope for the future. It is sad, but impressive commentary for those who seek the ways of the world in preference to the truths of God. And again, that is from the story of Daniel the prophet, page 187. And here you have the definition of Jupiter Ammon, which symbolizes power, authority, and the divine right to rule. You know, this divine right to rule is an old assumption. This goes back to the Dark Ages, when all of the kings, because of the Pope, felt that they had a divine right to rule. And I do not doubt that because of the attitude of the Christian right today, that sooner or later Donald Trump will be considered having a divine right to rule. Okay, here is another statement from an article by A.T. Jones from the Bible Echo of May 1888. He goes over the same story, but just he emphasizes more things in this article. It's more broadly applied. Okay, so he says, when Paul and Barnabas were trying to persuade the people of Lystra to turn from the vanities of idolatry, they said unto them that although God suffered all nations to walk in their own ways, nevertheless he left not himself without witness. The name of this article, by the way, is Not Without Witness. God does not leave himself without witness, in that he did good and gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. These are some of the means by which God witnesses of himself to all nations. When the prophet Isaiah sets forth the absurdity and inexcusableness of idolatry by simply showing how a god is made, a man who plants a tree which the rain nourishes until it has grown large enough to be used, then he cuts it down, and with part of it he makes a fire by which he warms himself and cooks his food, and the residue he makes into a god, and falls down to it and worships it, and cries to it, Deliver me, for thou art my God. Isaiah 44:14-17. Then the prophet shows where such people fail to use the common sense that belongs with nature itself, as it is that the rain nourishes the tree from which he makes his god. If he does not know who is the God, why doesn't he worship the power that gives the rain? If he would but do that, he would be walking in the light of common sense, of reason, and of faith, and would soon find out God. Men can, by searching, find out God, but God expects him to search, and in the search to use the common sense and the faculties generally that God has given to him. And men are without excuse who do not do it. Romans 1:20. But it is not alone by the giving of rain and fruitful seasons that God has not left himself without witness. He has done it by revelation. Okay. Not just by common sense, but by revelation and through living testimony. When Egypt stood at the head of the world in power, wisdom, and influence, God made manifest in that land his power and his glory in such a way that all the nations heard of it. The Canaanites heard of it and knew that the God that delivered Israel was the God of heaven and earth. Joshua 2:9-11. The next nation that arose to power and influence in the world was Assyria. And when Assyria had grown corrupt and had gone far away from God, the Lord graciously sent a Hebrew prophet to the people and called them to repentance. You'll read about that in the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 and onward. After this, again and again, he bore witness to Assyria that he is God above all, the most notable instance perhaps being the slaughter of the host of Sennacherib, Isaiah 37. Babylon next spread her empire over all nations, and to them God left not himself without witness. He bore witness directly to Nebuchadnezzar in the dream of the great image and its interpretation by Daniel, the captive Hebrew. Again, in the affairs of the 3 Hebrews and the fiery furnace, God bore witness of himself to all the power and all the provinces of that mighty empire, both by the representatives that were present, there in Daniel 3 verse 3, and also by the decree of the king which followed. Verse 29. Again, when Nebuchadnezzar, after being warned of God, there in Daniel chapter 4, was driven out from the presence of men to run wild for 7 years, he learned by it that Jehovah rules in the affairs of men, and that he is above all gods. And when he recovered his understanding, he published to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, that he thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God had wrought. Again, when that empire was on the brink of ruin, God, by the handwriting on the wall of the palace, bore a last parting witness to the lascivious king, that he was weighed in the balances and found wanting, and that his kingdom was given to the Medes and Persians. Daniel 5:27 and 28. The power of Media and Persia came after, and through that power also God again bore witness of himself unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. For Daniel, the servant of God, was cast into a den of lions and came forth unhurt, because God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, that they should do him no hurt. Then King Darius wrote to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, that the God of Daniel is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. Daniel 6:25 and 26. When Darius was dead and Cyrus reigned, he also made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God. Now notice, when Alexander the Great was in the full tide of his career of conquest, he stood at the temple of the Most High in Jerusalem and heard the witness of God concerning himself read from the Hebrew Scriptures. And Donald Trump, who is represented by Alexander the Great, will also hear the witness of God concerning himself read in the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. And through the Greek language, which the career of Alexander was instrumental in spreading throughout all the Eastern world, God chose to give witness of himself in the salvation wrought for man in the death and resurrection of his own dear Son. Very interesting there that he brings us up, that it was Alexander, who was a Greek now, which was instrumental. Alexander was instrumental in spreading throughout all the Eastern world the knowledge of God by the Greek language. Okay? And the story of the gift of salvation through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And when Rome ruled the world, God not only left not himself without witness in the preaching of the gospel to every nation under heaven, but also by the Apostle Paul, he bore witness more than once to the head of the Roman world himself. And from that day to this, God has not left himself without witness to all nations. Nor was it only to these great empires and nations that the Lord bore witness of himself. In Jeremiah chapter 27 verses 2 through 11 is the copy of a message from the Lord that was written by the prophet Jeremiah and was sent to the king of Edom and to the king of Moab, and to the king of the Ammonites, and to the king of Tyrus, and to the king of Zidon, by the hand of the messengers which come to Jerusalem. And the time would fail us to tell of all the testimonies that God bore by Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and Joel, and Amos, and Obadiah, and Zephaniah, and Zechariah, not only to Assyria, and Babylon, and Egypt, and Medo-Persia, but also to Edom, and Moab, and Ammon, and Tyre, and Zidon, and Syria, and Arabia, and to all the nations round about. It is literally true that God has not left himself without witness unto all nations in all ages. And God has not left himself without witness in the United States of America. And when in that great day of the Lord the great trumpet shall be blown, there shall gather before the glorious throne of the Most High God a great multitude which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, and will cry with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And that, again, was from A.T. Jones in the Bible Echo and Signs of the Times, May 1888. Now we come to this passage here from the works of Josephus, this Jewish historian, complete and unabridged, translated by William Whiston, A.M., page 244, okay? So, of course, Josephus probably wrote, I don't know, like Greek or Hebrew, I don't know, probably Greek. And he tells the story that we've already heard, but in more detail, the story of Alexander when he visited Jerusalem and met with the high priest. And I'm saying again that Alexander in all of this represents Donald Trump, who will in some way, shape, or form, he will meet with Adventism. So this is what Josephus says. Now, mind you, the way that he wrote, now again, this is a translation, okay? And so some of this is going to be possibly awkward, okay? It's a little bit different than what we write today in modern English. It's English because, you know, it was translated from the original language, whether it was Greek or what, I don't know, but it was translated into English, but nevertheless the English is a bit awkward in some places. So he says, Now Alexander, when he had taken Gaza, made haste to go up to Jerusalem, and Jaddua, the high priest, when he heard that, okay, so when this high priest in Jerusalem, the high priest of Israel, now he's hearing that Alexander, the king, is coming. When he heard that, he was in agony and under terror, as not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians, since the king was displeased at his foregoing disobedience. Evidently, sometime before that, the high priest and Israel, they disobeyed Alexander the Great. I don't know the story behind that, but that's immaterial to this. But that's why he was afraid. That's why the high priest was afraid. He therefore ordained that the people should make supplications and should join with him in offering sacrifices to God, whom he sought to protect that nation and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. So he tells the people, let's pray to God, okay, and offer sacrifices to God that he might protect our nation. He's fearing the consequences of Alexander's visit, and that God would deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. Okay? This reminds me, dear friends, of Joel chapter 2. Okay? Blow the trumpet in Zion, proclaim a fast, etc., etc. Read Joel chapter 2. Whereupon God warned him in a dream. God warned this high priest in a dream. Now, that's the way that Josephus put it. He said that God warned him. It really could have been worded a little bit differently, but it was nevertheless a message of encouragement. When you think of a warning, it's like some impending doom, but that's not what God was telling him. He was actually encouraging him. So whereupon God warned him in a dream which came upon him after he had offered sacrifice, that he should take courage and adorn the city and open the gates, that the rest should appear in white garments, but that he and the priests should meet the king in the habits proper to their order, without the dread of any ill consequences, which the providence of God would prevent. Upon which, when he rose from his sleep, he greatly rejoiced, and declared to all the warning he had received from God, according to which dream he acted entirely, and so waited for the coming of the king. Notice it says the rest appeared in white garments. Okay, that reminds me of, among other things, there in Revelation chapter 16. Let's go to Revelation chapter 16 here just for a moment. Revelation chapter 16, and it says, Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. And you have also Revelation chapter 3, the robe of Christ's righteousness. That white raiment is offered to God's people. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. Okay? So, when they're going out to meet the king, they're clothed with symbolically, they're clothed with the righteousness of Christ. Okay? Which, this is a crisis. Okay? This is a crisis. And it represents the fact that the people of God today need to be ready for that crisis by cleansing themselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of the Lord, getting ready for the soon coming King, Jesus Christ. And when he understood that he was not far from the city, he went out in procession. This is speaking of the high priest now, with the priests and the multitude of citizens. The procession was venerable, and the manner of it different from that of other nations. It reached to a place called Stapha, which name translated into Greek signifies a prospect, for you thence have a prospect of Jerusalem and of the temple. And when the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans that followed him thought that they would have liberty to plunder the city and torment the high priest to death, which the king's displeasure fairly promised them, the very reverse of it happened. So apparently these Phoenicians and these Chaldeans that followed Alexander, they thought, Alexander is going to Israel. I can't wait. But because then we can torment the high priest to death and we can plunder the city. They thought that Alexander was going to be fine with that because of the king's previous displeasure at the high priest's disobedience. But the reverse happened. For Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance in white garments, while the priest stood clothed in white linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate whereon the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adored that name, and first saluted the high priest. So, instead of Alexander's telling these Phoenicians and Chaldeans, go ahead and plunder the city and torment the high priest to death. Instead, when Alexander saw this multitude at a distance in white garments, and the priest stood clothed in white linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate whereupon the name of God was engraved, Alexander approached by himself and adored that name, and first saluted the high priest. He adored the name of God. The Jews also did all together with one voice salute Alexander and encompass him about, whereupon the kings of Syria, now watch this, whereupon the kings of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done, and supposed him disordered in his mind. So these kings of Syria had evidently hated the Jews, okay, and they, like the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans, probably expected that, Alexander was going to okay this torturing of the king and to death and plundering the city. When Alexander approached by himself and adored the name of God which was on the priest's mitre, the Syrians looked at him like, what's wrong with you? Are you out of your mind? You have lost your mind, Alexander. However, Parmenio alone went up to him and asked him how it came to pass that when all others adored him, he's asking Alexander this, when all others adored him, he should adorn the high priest of the Jews. So he's saying to Alexander, how could it be that all other people adored you, but then you go and adore the high priest of the Jews? To whom he replied, Alexander replied, I did not adore him, but that God who hath honored him with his high priesthood. For I saw, see, not only the high priest had a dream sometime before this meeting, but also Alexander. He says, for I saw this very person, this high priest, in a dream, in this very habit meaning his clothing. That's an old English word for clothing. When I was at Dios in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay. Evidently, God told him to make no delay, but boldly to pass over the sea thither, for that he would conduct my army, and would give me the dominion over the Persians. Whence it is that, having seen no other in that habit or in that type of clothing, and now seeing this person in it, the garb of the high priest, and remembering that vision and the exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under the divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius and destroy the power of the Persians, and that all things will succeed according to what is in my own mind. And when he had said this to Parmenio, and had given the high priest his right hand, the priest ran along by him, and he came into the city. And when he went up into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God according to the high priest's direction, which I question. I believe he did that, but whether that was right or not is another matter. That this heathen king should go into the temple and offer sacrifice to God, when sometime many years before, Uzzah, I think it was, had gone into the temple as the king of Israel, I think it was, and he was struck with leprosy. But nevertheless, that's how the story goes, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priest. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, now, okay, so the book of Daniel was shown to Alexander. Now, there's an asterisk next to that, and it explains at the bottom of the page, the place showed Alexander might be, and Haskell said it was, it might be Daniel 7 verse 6. It had to be. Daniel 7 verse 6, chapter 8 verses 3 through 8, and verse 20, 21, and 22, and chapter 11 and verse 3, the verse that we started out reading at the beginning of this study, which says, And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And of course that was Alexander, but Alexander represents Donald Trump at the end of the world. So Daniel, the book of Daniel was showed to Alexander, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks, that would be Alexander, should destroy the empire of the Persians. When Alexander realized this, he supposed that himself was the person intended, and he was correct. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present. But the next day he called them to him, and bade them ask what favors they pleased of him, whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers, and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. He granted all they desired, and when they entreated him that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, he willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. And when he had said to the multitude that if any of them would enlist themselves in his army on this condition, that they should continue under the laws of their forefathers and live according to them, he was willing to take them with him. Many were ready to accompany him in his wars. And again, that was from the works of Josephus, complete and unabridged, translated by William Whiston. So there you have it. Donald Trump will meet with Adventism. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. Only God knows. I'm just saying that from the witness of the repetition of history, remember, the Word of God says there is no new thing under the sun. These things were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. The Bible writers wrote more for our time than for theirs. Not that Josephus' words are in the Bible, but the history, okay, when you read Daniel 11, when you read Daniel 11 verses 3 and 4, when you read, or verses 2, 3, and 4, when you read Daniel 8 about the he-goat that waxed great, okay, representing Greece, defeating Persia, Medo-Persia, and Daniel chapter 7, even Daniel chapter 2 for that matter, okay. This history that Josephus recorded is in these verses. You don't find it explicitly, but it's there. It's there. So that's what we're looking at here in the near future. If you have any comments about this, I would encourage you to place these comments at the bottom of this video. If you enjoy this type of content, if it has been a blessing to you, then by all means tap that like button so that it can be sent far and wide to those who are hungering for truth in these last days. And if you haven't subscribed, we would highly encourage you to do so. Thank you for joining us here at Jewels of Truth. We hope and pray that you will have a good day in the Lord.